Welcome to the Waiting List podcast. Tell us a story.
It's like many things you start building from scratch.
And then I'm like, wait, I really do like watches because
You've seen so many watches that makes you excited.
I think I really do like watches.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to see if you are a watch enthusiast. Right, welcome to another episode of the Waiting List podcast. And today we are welcoming back Eric Heise, who's actually already done one interview with us where he talks about completely his life story in a very abbreviated version, abridged version. But today we are going to talk about your watches. And forgive me, Long Long and Jacqueline, for not introducing you to the show, but they are here. I can assure you they are here, right? So let's get into it. You have a very specific niche of watches that you enjoy collecting, Eric. Do you mind sharing?
I have many.
Well, you definitely have a lot. We're definitely going to go into that too. But do you mind sharing what watches you like and why?
What watch are you wearing right now?
Okay, what am I wearing right now? I am wearing an Anycar Sea Pearl with a dial that was custom painted by my friend David. He is an artist from Colombia, South America, but was trained as a painter in Paris. He wanted to do custom dials. And he painted some flies on a dial. And I said, people are just going to want to swat your wrist. Why don't you make a dial with bees on it? And he painted this for me. And it is just a masterpiece. It's very painterly. There are these two bees. And it's like they're sucking the honey from the flower that is the hour and the minute hand. And it's just a masterpiece. He made that for me. Isn't that great?
He must use a very small brush to get all the
amazing.
details.
It's a miniature painting. It is a very unique, very personal present from him to me. And I just love it. It's crazy. I love the brand for one thing. Anycar has a fascinating history. And,
very cool.
They're great watches. And I've got a pretty large collection of those. But that's what I'm wearing right now.
It's great.
So what's your niche then? Would you say that encompasses it? What watches do you like?
My niche is what I can find. Remember, I am an unusual collector because
Hoarder.
I don't shop online. So I don't go out and say, okay, today I'm going to collect Bulova. It's what I. Well, yes, but I have to find it. It has to come up in front of me. So what I collect are the watches that I found on my walks in Shanghai. So that means Chinese watches and the watches that were imported to China back in the days. And that really covers the whole history of watchmaking, but some are much harder to find than others. Like Anycar, Mr. Racine had a very, very close relationship with the Chinese government. And so these watches were pretty widely available and considered a luxury product. And so I find a lot of these. And it's kind of, for me, it's like a crime of opportunity. You know, if I find it, I buy it. You remember when you and I went out shopping?
We should talk about that. We should talk about that. So like, basically, Eric, every Thursday, Friday, did you do Saturday as well, Eric?
Well, the best flea market was Friday mornings.
Okay, so for like about 3 days of the week.
I didn't take you to that one. I took you to more brick and mortar watch shops.
And so we went cycling.
You bought nothing, but I bought what, 5?
Well, I said to him, look, you go on this every week you do it, and you have to wake up early to do it. And then, so we got on the bike, got to his place. Like when we say bike, I meant like bicycle, right?
Yeah.
And then and I remember it was cold. So you get to see like, if anybody knows Shanghai, you know, you could be in a high rise and then you turn a corner and you're back into these like local streets. And then we're just cycling through, you know, stopping for a bite to eat, and then going to these flea markets, going to, yeah, basically what you would say car boot things, but without the car boot, with people just putting a towel on the floor and they're
Right.
putting those down. So you saw like a lot of red books. You saw a lot of like 1930s Art Deco period antiques, a lot of silverware. So just on that side, from the history point of view, I think it's a great way to get into history. Like for me, Chinese history, it was all there. Even the old storybooks on how they were, very basic. The content probably quite political. All that stuff was there, and it was a great day. But I've always been on a hunt for a Chinese watch, so through Eric, was learning more about Chinese watches. And I thought, with my heritage and the fact that I'm into watches, I want to get a Chinese watch, but what watch do I get? So that's why I went on to this thing. And Eric was telling me, that's kind of like my education into Chinese watches, which watches are, for me, I'm always about, which one's the hardest one to find ever, that's the one I want. Because I don't want to be like Eric. And I will say it now, Eric has probably over 300 watches. I don't want to be like that, right? I don't want to be collecting 300 watches. I just want one super special one, right?
Right.
And that was our day. And I thank you, Eric. It was a really great day. Obviously, Eric knows where those places were. And the way you do the bartering with the people, it's like down at Portobello Market in London. Talking about how much for this, and he goes, no, yeah, and you think, yeah, you can,
and then
right?
you start walking away, and then they're like,
no, I'm telling, you start walking away, exactly, and then I'm telling Eric to fuck off because he's got a white face. So I'm like, don't go in, because everyone's gonna think we got money, just fuck off,
right,
and then. So yeah, and everybody knew that Eric was a sucker. Like everybody knew that when Eric came to the store, they knew him. They're like, you're gonna like this, yeah. And guess what? What turned out to be an event for me? He ended up buying another 4 to 5 watches, right? Every single time.
I found 2 watches that are important parts of my collection, I believe, on that day. I found a Seibco trench watch. Seibco is something people don't know about. It was a very early joint venture between China and Germany to make watches. And I'd found a pocket watch before, and this was a trench watch. And my collection is thin on trench watches, and had this beautiful black and white porcelain dial. And it's a fascinating document. It's a early moment in the trade and cooperation between China and Europe. And it's trench watch, which is the dawn really of wristwatches. So that was something pretty cool, and it was very cheap. It was not expensive. So that was the real find for me that day.
Let's back up a little bit, because I don't want to basically assume that people know what a trench watch is.
Right.
So could you explain what a trench watch is?
Right. Well, watches went from clocks to being something that you could carry with you in a pocket, to being something that was worn on a pendant or a wrist, on a strap, on a string, and mostly by women. But in the First World War and other wars past the turn of the last century, people realized, hey, we need portable, reliable, rugged watches. And initially, they would put, a pocket watch into an enclosure, what we call like a bun strap. And eventually they started making them custom made to be wristwatches. And those were the trench watches, because they're what they wore in the trenches, fighting World War I. And this became popularized by, people like the Prince of Wales wearing one in photographs, and the veterans wearing them after the war. And people started to realize, hey, you don't have to keep this fragile thing in your pocket that's going to fly out and get broken. You can actually wear it on your wrist and tell the time instantly. You don't have to fish around for it. And trench watches usually have a specific shape. They're sort of they're halfway between a wristwatch and a pocket watch, and to me, very interesting historically.
So from what I know as well for trench watches is they normally have, yeah, you're right with what I know is that they're right in the World War kind of one era where the
Right.
soldiers, because of the shrapnel, they have a cage which goes over the front of the face of the watch. So it's kind of like your glass has what's it called? The noughts and crosses. You know that game, noughts and crosses? You know how you
Right.
have to draw the lines before you play? Yeah, it
Right.
has that kind of cage on the
Yes,
glass to
some of them
protect.
had what was called a shrapnel guard,
Yeah.
which was a piece of metal with holes in it that would allow you to still read the watch, but would hopefully protect it from all the dangers of warfare in the trenches. I don't have a watch with a shrapnel guard. It's something that's on my list to collect.
Yeah.
Were you interested in watches before that? I mean, why is it that you're interested in Chinese watches? What grabbed your attention with Chinese watches at that time
Well,
in your life?
I always loved old watches, but I didn't have very many at all. I didn't have a collection. I maybe had a few, but I got to Shanghai, and I went to Dongtai and I saw the watches that said Shanghai on them, and I was just fascinated. And I worked very hard to learn the history of them, and it is a fascinating history. It's deep and rich and varied, and tells you a lot about the development of China in the modern era. And back in the days, you couldn't buy very much. So a Shanghai watch 40, 50 years ago was somebody's most valuable possession. And these days, they can be found and restored and collected very cheaply. And that's why I have a large collection.
Yeah, so I think we mentioned this in our last episode about the Shanghai Military diver that you guys know I have. That was
let me tell you the story of mine.
Yeah, okay. Tell your story of yours.
When I hooked up with Ron Good, the super collector in Canada, he told me about the SS4, the Shanghai Military diver. The Chinese military divers needed a watertight, highly accurate watch, and they designed a couple of versions, and then the one that became the most famous is the SS4. And this is sort of the holy grail of Chinese watch collecting. They only made about 30,000 of them total, which for Chinese watch production is nothing. And so they are highly, highly collectible, and they're beautiful and very rugged and fascinating history. And most of them were made in 1972. And I looked for one of these things for years, literally. And I would see them, and they would be outrageously expensive or not even for sale. The shops would say, for display only, not for sale. They were just showing their seriousness by having one. It was that sought after. And I figured, okay, I'm never going to find one of these things, or I'm never going to be able to afford one. And then one day I was on one of my exercise walks, and I went into an antique store, and I pulled open a drawer in an old chest, and there it was. The SS4 in perfect condition. And I asked the guy, what do you need for it? He said, 600 RMB. I said, will you take 5? He said, sure. I peeled out my money and floated home on a cloud. And maybe I'm like the junkie who's always tried to recreate that initial high. And never quite getting there. But that was a real thrill, and that led me to discovering how to get these things properly restored by a good professional watchmaker. And I discovered the watch lady, and she does magnificent work. She is just a genius at restoring these things. And very, very reasonably priced, and cheerful and helpful. And without her, I probably wouldn't have a collection. But when we went out, I told you about that watch, and you said, look for one for me.
Yeah, so this was a while
And
ago. Yeah, like
right,
way
right.
longer, way before I actually uh got the call for it, because I actually got the call for it during COVID when I was in Hong Kong.
Right.
And he messaged me and he said, I
Mm,
found it.
mm.
And I was like, okay. He goes, there's a few people that are interested in it, because he's actually at the store. He was actually at the store and there was like other people there, Chinese people there.
Right,
But
right.
all the Chinese people didn't want to pay the money. And I was like, just pay whatever. Just pay whatever. Just get it. Just get it. Just get it. He goes, are you sure? Yeah, just get it. I don't care about 100 kwai. Just get it. Yeah. Like,
Right. Well,
so,
I did get
yeah.
it, and it's always a bit of a risk because these things are faked. But I got a good one. You got a good one.
Yeah, and then you took
And
it to get it validated and
right.
checked, and
Uh-huh.
yeah, it is a good one because the dial's like completely original.
The dial is unmolested. It is in brilliant condition, and yeah, it's a good one. And it's a 1971, so it's a little more rare than most of them. So you got
And I
a
have
good
the
one.
original bracelet too.
Yeah, I found a bracelet for you.
Yeah.
Um,
So, but in terms of like, now we're talking about the Shanghai Military diver. It is one of the holy grails, but it isn't
yes.
the holy grail, is it?
No, it is not.
There
Well,
is
there
one
are.
watch that if anybody is listening to this, I will buy off them. It's the Aviator watch.
Right. The aviator
If you can
chronometer
give me
from the
one of
early
those,
60s.
contact me privately. We'll sort a deal out.
I've only actually seen a couple in my entire life, the real originals. They are very super rare. But there's always something that's more rare than anything else. Like the prototype watches and things like that you're never going to find. So sometimes you just have to take what you can get. But no, that's a really terrific example of a good Shanghai watch is the Shanghai Military Diver, the SS4. And by the way, they've made a very, I think, faithful reissue of it that is quite modern and quite wearable. I'd love to have one of those, but I don't.
Yeah, I'm not interested in the reissue. I want the real thing. Yeah,
Okay,
I want the
okay,
pain. I want the pain. Right.
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 But
So
I collect, a lot of different watches. The watches that were imported into China, like the Anycars and the Titonis, and the watches that just existed from the colonial era to the present day. I collect the old American vintage watches, the Bulovas, the Elgins, Waltham, Wittenauer, Longines, the Longines Wittenauer watches. Some are almost never seen, like the Illinois watches. You can find them in America, but you just can't find them in China. Some watches are harder to find or more expensive, like the Hamiltons, because Hamilton still advertises. So the Chinese consider them a Mingbiao, and it'll cost a lot more than a similar Bulova. But I collect those and I use them in my acting to help me create the characters that I play.
So
That's
one of the podcast episodes you particularly enjoyed was obviously because of your interest, Cole Pennington's interview, where he dives deep into military watches. What part of your collection is actually American watches? How much percentage are American watches and Chinese watches? Because I think it's less on American watches. And why have you not delved deeper into the historic watches of your own country more than you have?
Well, actually, I have. When you think about it, I just met with a super collector of Bulova watches here in Hong Kong, and I thought I had a lot of Bulova watches. It turns out I have 30.
That
I
is a
got them
lot,
all
though.
together. That's a
Like,
lot.
let's not deny this, Eric. We need to address this issue. Yeah. When you said I don't have many trench watches, you do have a lot.
This guy has 700 Bulova watches. So, there's always somebody more crazy than you, Daniel. Yep. But no, I have a respectable collection of vintage American watches.
Right.
And I wear them. I wore a Hamilton as to play the art collector in Mingguo Qita, the TV series, and it helped me create that character.
Right. So what's your favorite watch then in your collection? Come on. 300 watches. Pick one out.
You make me pick. It's a terrible choice. It depends upon what day of the week. Today, it's the watch that David painted for me, the one I'm wearing. I'm one of these crazy guys who changes watches 2 or 3 times a day. And
I mean, you have the watches to change. Like, yeah.
Because I always say like 300 watches, right? Some of those watches aren't getting worn if you wear them once a day, more than once a year.
Some of them are too special or too fragile to wear. I like to have good representative examples of a style, a brand, a watch that's historically important. And some of them are just too fragile to wear. I'd break them. I'm actually very hard on watches, so I have to be careful about what I wear. And when movie sets, film production is dangerous. Things get smashed. I always have to bring a backup. What we like to have in film production is a hero watch and a crash watch. And the hero watch is for the close-ups, and the crash watch is for the dangerous situations where they're throwing you across the room. And that happens. Believe me, it happens. And that's the watch that you can sacrifice, but it has to look like the other one. So sometimes there's a reason why I have doubles. But no, my favorite watch, you got to ask beyond the day, which one is my favorite?
Right.
I have a question. How do you store your watches? Because you have so many. And then now that you live in Hong Kong, I think it's quite humid there.
Right. I keep them mostly sealed in Ziploc bags. That keeps out the humidity, keeps down the oxidation, and keeps in the radon gas from the radium, which is decaying. And you don't want it, ventilating out into your living space too much. They used to use radium on watches. That's what they did. And it's not as dangerous as people think, but it is still radium, and you do have to take some elementary precautions.
Eric, do you ever get stopped for transporting like 300 watches when you travel?
No.
Yeah, with radium.
He gets stopped for transporting animals.
No, but like when you go through airport securities and when like you've never been stopped with people saying like, oh, what are all of these in your backpack or in your suitcase?
Never. No.
That's...
Plus, Jack, he's white. Like in China, he should I'm just going to go through. They don't even check him. They're like, please.
That's right. I look like a Boy Scout, so they just wave me through.
No, because I've heard a lot of horror stories of people like moving watches, traveling with their own watches, and they would get stopped at security points, and they want you to provide proof of purchase. So that's what I was thinking. Like when they see you. The
thing is like a lot of Eric's watches are very definitely vintage looking. So they're more concerned about
my watches are not that valuable. I'm not a dealer, I'm a collector, and I'm an actor. I use them in my work. And this watch to me, this Anycar with the painting on it, is practically worthless, to be honest. It's got enormous sentimental value to me, and it's fascinating historically and all of that. But it's not a gold Rolex. It's not a Vacheron Constantin or Patek Philippe. It's not I'm not doing anything fraudulent with it. Obviously.
Right, so Eric, you did touch on, I couldn't get you to pick your favorite watch, but you did touch on some special watches.
Yes.
That's what don't go through like 10, but I'll give you like 3. Yeah, that
Okay.
I'd like you to share. I don't know if the poll router's in that, because you were very keen to talk about it in the last episode. But
Right.
which ones are special that I'd like you to just talk about to the audience?
Well, the pole rooter is an amazing watch. The history is just so rich. You know, it was Gerald Genta's first watch when he was 23 years old, and the influence that it has had on you know, there are a lot of other watches in my collection that are clearly aping that watch. So that's a super important watch in my collection. Let's see, what are some of my other favorites? You know, there are some watches that you know, I never wear because of, you know, sentimental attachment to them. Like my 2008 Swatch Olympics chronograph that I got as a souvenir at the Olympics in 2008. And that's a funny story because I lost it on a movie set. And one of the stars found it and made sure it got back to me. Darren Shalavi, who played Twister, the boxer in Ip Man 2.
Oh.
And we later became very good friends when I was the sound mixer on a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie down in Guangzhou, Pound of Flesh. And I still had the watch. And Darren later passed away, unfortunately, had a undiagnosed heart condition, and so that watch is just too much emotion for me to ever wear again. I just keep it special. But there are other watches that I was really glad I found. Like this summer, I had to play a doctor in a movie about the Jewish settlement in Shanghai during the Second World War, and how the Jews were herded into a ghetto in Shanghai. And I played a doctor. And so I found an Elgin doctor's watch. You know, back in the days, a sub-seconds was too small for a doctor to be able to read a pulse. And the center seconds watches before the Second World War were very rare and very expensive. So what they did was they expanded the sub-seconds and enlarged the whole case in a way that allowed it to have a very large sub-seconds. And that was a doctor's watch because he could take a pulse with it. And to play that doctor, I wanted to have that watch. And I found one, and it's very special to me. So if the movie ever comes out, it had a couple of titles as we were shooting, as Refuge and Shanghai Sojourners. But if that movie is ever released, you'll see me wearing that watch.
Cool.
I want to ask you something, actually, Eric. Sorry,
yes.
Just cutting in. But, you know, I was just thinking just now, you've got so many Chinese brands, right? And a lot of them are called like Shanghai, Beijing, Tianjin. Do you know why they're all named after provinces? Why don't they have like a generic like brand name? Okay.
In the 50s, all the watches were coming into China through Hong Kong and from Switzerland. And the Chinese decided we have to start making our own watches. And they started making the Tianjin and the Shanghai watches, and then the Beijing watches. And they copied Swiss movements and bought watchmaking machinery from Switzerland and used it to make more watchmaking machinery, and started turning these things out by the millions. But it still wasn't enough. And so manufacturing started popping up in other places, and it was all a little disjointed. So they made a decision in the early 70s that everybody was going to make the same watch. And it became the standard movement, the Tongji movement, which was based on the epic Anycar 1010 movement, which when properly made was chronometer grade movement. But the standard movement is simplified, more rugged, and easy to fix with simple tools. And they decided that they should start making these all over China. And at one point there were 300 different brands making watches. And they usually had the local place name as the name of the brand of the watch, like the Nanjing watches and the Suzhou watches and such. And they're very proud of them. They would decorate the backs with these beautiful designs. And it's all a fascinating history. And that's why you see so many different brand names, and they're usually the place name.
So do you think it was because, like, back then, it was more of a national thing where the national had legislation to actually go and make more watches because we need more watches, and therefore it's not like we're less commercial and more we actually need them. So we just make it easy and put like, oh, this is Shanghai, Beijing. It's just easier like that, right? So
well, in a planned economy, things don't happen organically. They happen in a planned way. And the plan was, okay, we're going to start fine manufacturing in this town by setting up a watch factory. And we're going to create the tradition and the training necessary so that as the country develops, those skills and facilities will be there. And watches were one of the ways they did that.
Okay. So, you're a Caucasian guy in the middle of Shanghai. You see these Chinese watches, and you know more about Chinese watches than any of us here. And we're supposed to be like Chinese, which is a little bit embarrassing. But
so embarrassing.
And you don't even know how to speak Chinese properly. So I can't see many foreigners having this particular interest in Chinese watches. So if there is someone like you, how do you even get into it? How do you get the information? How did you research for it?
Well, more people have the interest after they meet me. I get them hooked.
I can see Jacqueline searching for that aviator as soon as we get offline, right?
Yeah.
And like basically
I wrote
screwing
it down
me
already.
over.
I was like,
Screwing me over, right?
Yeah.
2 weeks later, say, Daniel, what did I find? Yeah. And I'll be like, fuck you.
Well, I'll tell you something I've got to say is women have incredible opportunities as collectors of vintage watches because the watches are cheaper. With the explosion of interest in men's vintage watches, there's been an explosion in price that hasn't been matched by the women's watches, by the way. I cry sometimes when I see the opportunities. It's like, oh, gee, this incredibly rare watch, but it's a woman's watch. And women can wear men's watches all day long. So you've got twice the opportunities. And this also is another point is people say, Eric, why are you so into watches? Men don't have as many opportunities as women have for expressing themselves with accessories. Women can wear all kinds of jewelry. What can a man wear? Not very much. How can we express our individuality, our style, our sense of who we are through what we put on our body? And a watch is one of the very few things that we've got to be able to do that with. And the vintage watch is the connection to how men used to do that. And there's a lot of nostalgia and interesting things involved. I'm an older guy. I'm 58 years old, so to me, manual winding a watch is a very comforting and normal thing. But to a younger person, they're like, "What am I doing?" It's like they're looking at a dial telephone. They don't know what it is. It's confusing. These days, automatic watches, quartz watches, have made it a lot easier, but to us, it's a heritage, it's a tradition.
How do you actually find out more about the Chinese watches if you're interested? If people listening saying, I want to go into this, where can they get the information from? Well,
there are a lot of resources online. There's much more than there were back when I started collecting, I'll tell you that. And people willing to share their knowledge. The Chinese are very, very generous with their knowledge. And they're very proud of their history, their heritage. And you can find out a lot just online. There's the Watch Wikipedia page. There are all kinds of resources. I get people into collecting these things, and they're fascinated to learn that, like a Shanghai watch, you can date it to the month if you know how to read the codes. You just need to have the table, and you can find that online. I share it with people, and it's a lot of fun.
And also your friend's website, Ron Good. I was taking a look at it during our break, and because I remember you were saying like how he has no museum in Alberta. Can you tell us,
very
like,
close to you?
Yeah, can you tell us like more about that? Like, because he obviously also has an interest in vintage Chinese watches, so like maybe something from his story could be passed on to our listeners who are also interested in getting started.
Yes, Ron Good is a character. He came to China years ago and was just captivated by the watches and the history, and he's made himself an expert, and he has a vast collection, and a very, very interesting one. And I finally got to meet him, and we went out watch hunting, and I introduced him to the Shanghai Watch Gang. Actually, it was my first meeting with the Shanghai Watch Gang. I took Ron Good, and he's very, very generous with his knowledge and understanding, and he can talk himself into anywhere. You take him around, and he got himself a private tour of the Shanghai Watch Factory, and he just gets to chatting with the dealers and things, and just fascinating character. But he's not the only one.
Ron Good is the kind of guy that was born American, but actually he should have been born Chinese. Like, he loves China.
He's Canadian.
Oh, sorry, he's Canadian. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's suffering now because he desperately wants to come back and visit China, but the whole virus situation makes it impossible.
Right, so we're approaching the end of this interview, which is unfortunate because I feel we could go on for another hour or two. But there's a couple of questions that as I was doing the questions for this interview, I thought, well, maybe I can incorporate these into future interviews. So the first of the two is, if your watches could speak, what would they say about you?
This guy's crazy.
Wear me, put me on your wrist.
They would probably say, "Thank you for rescuing me." You know, for me, it's about restoration and resurrection. You know, I'm an unusual collector because I'm not about perfection. I'm about resurrection. I like to to me, the thrill is not finding something that's perfect. It's finding something and making it run again and making it useful again, and making it work. You know, take it with me on these shoots to be in movies and TVs and TV series and television commercials and travel and have fun. You know, these watches were made to be useful, and I hope that if they have a soul, that they're grateful.
Okay, good answer. The last question is, what watch out there personifies you, encapsulates you? It can be one you own or not that you own, but if you had one watch that personifies you and your life, which one would it be?
That's a very tough question. The first thing that pops in mind, I love the big lug any car divers. These were sort of made as a alternative to the Omega Seamasters of the 1950s, and they're magnificent watches, and they have these big thick lugs and very readable faces. They're usually very simple steel cases, three-handers, no date. I like a very simple watch, and they're not a grand brand, but they're a great brand, and maybe that's my collection philosophy.
Oh, fantastic. Right, before we end the podcast, we do always this quick fire thing. It never ends up being quick fire, but they're just random questions that we ask, and it just gives us an excuse to not always just talk about watches. But here we go. Okay.
Okay.
Right. The first one, Tell us one thing about the world of acting we don't know, or the average person doesn't know.
Oh, there's no modesty. You just pitch off your clothes in front of everybody.
Do people care?
Nobody cares. You know, we've got a scene to shoot. Let's get out of these clothes and into the wardrobe.
Sounds perfect for you, Dan.
I knew that was coming. Just can't deny it. Right. Number 2. How many watches is enough, Eric? Seriously. How many watches is enough?
It's never enough, Daniel. It's just never enough.
Right. Okay.
Cue the Greatest Showman song, like never enough.
Right. Number 3. Best movie you've ever seen.
The best movie I've ever seen.
Ooh.
That's a very, 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 very good question. As a well-crafted piece of filmmaking, it's hard to get better than The Silence of the Lambs. The performances, the shooting of it, the suspense that it builds, the story building to a crescendo. It's tough to get any better than that movie.
That's pretty good, yeah.
I was just watching The Red Dragon the other day.
Yeah, I watched it too. Literally a month ago.
Yeah.
Right.
And you just, that whole story is just so encapsulated in it. You're like, just watching it. It's so good.
Yeah.
Right. Number 4. What's the most memorable watch you've seen in the flesh?
The most memorable watch I've seen in the flesh. You know, at the watch festival, there was the H. Moser that changed colors when you moved the dial.
Okay, yeah.
That just, my eyes popped out of my head, my jaw dropped down to my chest. It was so beautiful because as I moved it in my hand, it was going from this violet to this green to this blue to this yellow. It was shocking. It was just wow. It was amazing.
Wow, I think you've just sold Moser like better than you could ever sell it. Right. What watch are you on the lookout for right now? That's number 5.
Right now I'm trying to find a bracelet. You know, when you have 300 watches, bracelets become a serious issue. So a lot of times they're sold without a bracelet. And finding one that's appropriate can be difficult. And I have a Tudor that I got that's on a leather strap, but I know in Hong Kong it's going to get hot here, and I'm not going to be able to wear these leather straps when it gets really sticky. So I'm trying to find a bracelet now for a 1968 Tudor.
Okay. Number 6. What's the most memorable role you've played as an actor?
That's a really good question too. Recently, I was just playing General Walker. They called him Johnny Walker. He was a general in the Korean War, and the series is playing right now. If you want to watch my hammy performances as General Walker, he was a fascinating character in the Korean War because he was the guy on the ground directing the UN forces, and unfortunately, he died fairly early in the war in a Jeep accident, just like his mentor, General Patton. So I'm not in a lot of the TV series because my character dies. But that was fun. That was a good one.
Okay. One modern watch you would like to own?
A modern watch I would like to own. Well, the reissue of the Shanghai Diver, but that's a reissue. So I don't know. Maybe that H. Moser. Our friend Gregor invited me into Vacheron Constantin, and those watches are just absolutely spectacular. I mean, they're a little fancy for me, but God, are they gorgeous. He put the minute repeater in my hand. It was like, wow. That was pretty wow.
Right. Okay. What has been the highlight of your life so far? The biggest highlight?
The biggest highlight.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a really good question. You know, I get these highlights all the time. You know?
I think it's your perspective on life. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, it does. You know, I've been in some, you know, incredible situations. When you're a journalist, for one thing, your history's happening right in front of your face. It's a real privilege to do that, and to, you know, to be able to work on entertainment that's going to be seen by hundreds of millions of people. It's a little humbling. In fact, you can't even think about it. If you think about it, you can't do it.
Actually, talking about that, Eric. So that happened earlier on in your career where, okay, so that was maybe your highlight of your life is being in the the White House doing this.
Right.
You know, I don't know if I speak for Long Long and Jacqueline, but I think I haven't seen my highlight yet. I think it's still yet to come. How does it feel when you know you've had it? Or when you think, and then you're not going to get another highlight, or you think, yeah, that was my peak. Like, how does it feel on that side?
Well, you know, when something really great happens to you, you float out of the place on a cloud. I was playing Harry Truman this summer in a very, very difficult shoot. We had to shoot 11 big dialogue scenes. It was in English, but it was it was a grueling day. And at the end of the day, I got a standing ovation from the crew, and the director came out and shook my hand and thanked me. And that just doesn't happen. But it was a real nice validation of my work. And I floated home on a cloud.
That's beautiful.
You know, it was great.
Okay. Wow. God, that's hard to beat. No, not 9. Your one takeaway from Shanghai.
Keep an open mind.
I like that one.
I always,
Very true about
you know,
Shanghai.
Saw myself as a guest. And, you know, a lot of foreigners come and they can get very frustrated because it's a foreign culture. It's, you know, developing in some ways. In some ways, it's super developed beyond my country in some ways. But you got to keep an open mind and an open heart. And when you do that, you'll have a good experience.
Okay. And the last one here is, having spent such a long time in Asia now.
Yeah.
Do you ever see yourself going back to the US?
Well, you know, I'm a citizen of the world. You know, where I live is where I hang my hat. I try to make myself comfortable wherever I am. But I don't know. I'm having fun in Asia. You know, I can do work here that I could never do in Los Angeles. Never, not in 1,000 years, not possible. So, you know, for the opportunities, it's great.
I think that's a great way to end the podcast. Yeah, it just feels like I'm floating on a cloud now as we finish this podcast. But
it's
again,
such
thank
real
you.
talk.
Yeah,
thank you.
Well,
for that, Eric.
I think these new collector series that we're doing, I think originally I was saying, you know, how do I get, you know, is there the story there? Or is it just, are we just talk about collecting watches? And then I realized, you know, everyone has a story, and especially their life story.
One thing I want to say is, you know, a lot of collectors are very jealous of their sources. And I like to believe I'm really generous. I take people out with me. If somebody wants to come with me watch hunting, I'm happy to take them with me. I don't see them as competition. I see them as company. And, you know, people.
That's why you didn't take me out on the Friday, yeah?
People are often overwhelmed by trying to collect vintage watches because they don't know what they're looking at. And it is overwhelming. And there you can make mistakes. Most of the watches, honestly, are overpriced. There are fakes. You can get into a black hole of repairs if you demand on having a vintage chronograph, for example. And it helps if you just ask for advice, ask other people who know what they're looking at to come with you and help you look. And don't buy an impulse thing. A lot of watches are impulse buys. and you can make mistakes. It's possible, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. You have to if you don't play, you can't win. You got to try.
Yeah. Finishing actually, Eric, Shanghai WatchGang does have a bit of a profile of being a bit of a rich boys club of just having all these pieces, right? And you've been probably a quiet member of Shanghai WatchGang. What would you say to someone who said that? It is that.
Oh, well, what I would say is what I always say is, look, men don't have many ways to express themselves. A watch is special. I've got this book, A Man and His Watch, and the quote is from Ralph Lauren. He says, "There's a special bond between a man and his watch." And whatever you think about Ralph Lauren, he is a genius and he knows men's fashion, and it's true. And we all really need ways to express ourselves, and should be able to do that however we want, whoever we are. And birds of a feather flock together. We find the groups we like.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Eric. Thank you for taking the time as well. We had a great time.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all for welcoming me. To our viewers, I hope that you enjoyed it. We enjoyed doing it.
Right. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Waiting List podcast. Hit the subscribe button and the next episode will come straight to your phone as soon as it's ready. Whilst I'm here, please remember to leave a nice review and follow us on Instagram at the Waiting List podcast.